Mike Goldstein is back to tell more stories about Book One and Dianetic auditing. And then we talk about Diana Hubbard and why she got divorced and her child, L. Ron Hubbard's granddaughter, Roanne. Then we get into the mission holders and the destruction of Scientology missions and the Guardian's office being disbanded. And then finally, we get into talking about Captain Bill Robertson. And I think you guys are going to be interested in all these stories because they are fascinating. Stick around. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I am here with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. How you doing today, Janice?
Good. G'day, everybody. And yes, thank you for tuning in to Scientology Peeling the Onion. We have a good show for you today.
Yeah, we've got a great guest back. You know, his last show was really popular. We've actually done several interviews with him, and all of them been great. But people were really interested in his Book One Dianetics, seminars and correspondence course that he put together and all that. We got a lot of views and talking about Diana Hubbard, right? All right. Well, without further ado, here he is back again, Mike Goldstein. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing
Good.
great.
Hi,
doing
Mike.
Great. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, where we left off, we had, like I said, we got a really good response on that Book One, video that we did a few weeks ago. And a lot of people ask questions about, do you still have the correspondence course? Because we have people that are still practicing Scientology and Dianetics and all that. And so why don't you go ahead and answer it for the people that are interested in something like that?
Well, as far as that correspondence course, no, I don't have it anymore. We had done a move. We didn't use that course since 1983, and at that point we had moved into a new place, and all the materials were together. And then when we moved from there, a few years later, it got lost. But that really was. But I know that there are copies of it out there. Some people say they've seen it or they have it. Probably the key to the course was John's supervision, and
Right.
One of the things we were about to do is train other people to deliver the course. We hadn't needed to do that because John was able to do it all, right? And
John Galusha.
John Galusha, he delivered it and supervised it, and that was so we just hadn't needed anybody else, and we were going to be training people, but it didn't happen because of what occurred with the church at that time.
If anybody out there has a copy of the extension course on Book One that John and Mike were running back in the early 80s, please let Mark or I know so we can coordinate on getting copies to people who are asking for it because they want to use it.
Well, where we left off last was, Scientology Management in Clearwater. They really didn't want you involved or whatever, something regarding the Book One. And so you went in a different direction, right?
Right. Well, what had happened was the project started in May of 1980. That's when Diana approved us doing that. So we started the whole thing at that time, and it was then and it took about a year till we got it to the point where we could launch it internationally, which was the whole key. That was the whole thing we wanted to do, and we were was at Flag the week right before May 9th. And that's when they want to do it. So the May 9th event. And somebody we'd been working with, Peter Pinshaw, the mission holder in Westport, Connecticut, he had put together this weekend seminar to interest people in doing the correspondence course in order to get them onto it. And the way we had done it is we did these events with John and I, where I would talk and then John would get up and he would give a little talk, and then he'd bring somebody up and do a session on them in front of the audience, do one or two or several sessions. And that event is where from there we would sign people up for the correspondence course. But since Peter couldn't do that, he designed this little seminar, Book One seminar for the weekend to get people interested. And that was the whole idea was Flag wanted to launch this thing on May 9th of 1981, a year later, and we had big events. I had one in Denver, Peter had one in Connecticut, so we worked out, like I mentioned last time, Peter going down the weekend before to deliver the seminar to the Flag staff, to the Div 6, so that they could then train their legionnaires and the people to take this out internationally, worldwide. So, we were really pumped. This was all set up. And then, of course, like I mentioned last time, we find out afterwards, Flag just told people at their event that they had come up with a seminar, and they never mentioned Survival Services, our organization, or the correspondence course, or anything else. And then they also started telling people that they could become fully competent by doing this seminar, which obviously wasn't true, but people believed it. But they got lots and lots of stats. They delivered this thing all over the world, and so at this point, we just kind of pulled back. I pulled back from the whole thing, and since we had such a big scene going in Denver and in Connecticut, that's where I concentrated. And at this time, it was like we had come up with our own seminar, which we called the Book One Congress, and it was modeled after the old congresses that John had delivered for LRH in the 50s, and that it was a two weekend thing where we would do a really nice training on them and drilling and everything that week, the first week, and then the next weekend they brought people in and they audited them and co-audited and that sort of thing. And at the time we had some problems, like I'd mentioned before, a problem with people, wanting to, undeclaring to clear, people that just clear stuff. So these were kind of things that were getting us a little bit into trouble. The other one I didn't mention was that picture of John and LRH. That was a big problem for Flag, in that picture was not authorized. They were saying, "Where did you get this? It's not an authorized picture." Well, Millie Galusha took it, and I have to mention
photograph, right?
Yeah, and they were very. And I said, "It doesn't have to. That's our photograph." Millie Galusha took that, and it was requested by LRH because they took pictures of each other. They photographed, and they also co-audited. And somebody had mentioned to me, I got to mention more about Millie because I'd said she was his secretary, and she was more than just a secretary. She was actually the first HCO, that secretary, because she also handled the whole first SO1 line, all the letters. And she worked on books with him. She edited for him. She was quite a powerhouse in those days. So she was.
You're talking about John Galusha's wife.
John Galusha's wife, Millie Galusha.
With her working with Hubbard.
Yeah, she did a lot of work with him. In fact, she actually did editing. She helped him in some of the compiling of some of the books. She actually put together New Slant on Life. That was her that did that book. So she was quite a powerhouse. The two of them were. Anyway, at this time, we just sort of put our attention on Denver and the scene we had here, and that's pretty much all that we were doing. And it didn't take very long for problems to come about because of the Flag delivery. And the missions at the time were expecting to get the kind of results that they were getting in the 50s. They were expecting to get great results with this, but people were quitting. They were stopping doing because they weren't competent. They didn't know what they were doing, and they stopped doing it. And somebody I had met when I was down at the base was he was the head of the follow. He was mission holder, not a mission holder. He was missions in charge for West U.S. And he published that briefing that I mentioned, the briefing about the eval that I did, the whole book one, the correspondence, and he published it in a newsletter that went out to the missions. And after a lot of these people saw this in the missions, they called me. They started calling me. And I think the first one was San Francisco, which was, they had the biggest book one thing going. This is where the flag had spent a lot of time out there, and they supposedly had a whole bunch of Dianetic counseling groups and all this sort of thing. But when
Was
they
that
called
Martin? Was that Martin Samuel's mission?
It might have been. I don't remember. Could have been. It was the big mission there in San Francisco, and they had like the biggest Book One thing going with the seminar.
Yeah, he had that in Davis mission.
Yeah, it might have been, right? This was actually in San Francisco. I remember the mission was like right near where you go to Chinatown, because we took off that night, John and I, went and had the greatest meal in Chinatown, but it was like right near there. And anyway, so when we get there, they had lots of Book One auditors. I can remember quite a few that had done the seminar. Plus, what these counseling groups were is they would get a Book One of the guys that was at attendees, and say the guy was a chiropractor. So they'd say, how would you like to be the chiropractor Dianetic counseling group? So he's the only one, but they would put up these stats, and they had all these counseling groups. It was just for a stat. They really weren't anybody involved. It was just like maybe one or two people that did the seminar, and they had their own counseling groups. They could say they had all.
You mean like basically the stat that Scientology Management was, how many groups have we created?
Right.
Oh, 2 people,
right.
You're now a group.
Oh,
there's
yeah.
3 over there. You guys are in Davis. Yeah, you're in a group now.
Right. They had them all up on this wall. It was the funniest thing. The guys at chiropractic, so chiropractic Dianetic counseling group. This guy is I don't know, whatever he was. I just remember chiropractic. There was other ones. Whatever the guy was, they have another stat. But nobody's doing anything now. So the mission's kind of freaking out. So we get there, and we decided what we're going to do is the same kind of event that we had done in the evenings for the last year, which was where I would get up and I would talk, and then John would come up. So we just asked them. We said, look, can you find some people that have never had any auditing, never done anything, that would volunteer. Same like we had done in Westport, Connecticut. So sure, they put it together. So we go in there, and they invited all of the people that had done the Dianetic seminar, Flag One, and other people. And they had this huge group, and John got up and he did sessions, and they were just, of course, wonderful. I never saw a session he did on stage that wasn't. Not one ever went bad. I mean, they were all that good. And so these people are just blown away. So they say, we want to speak with Don. We want to speak with them. And they start telling, we got to speak with him. So, yeah.
I was going to ask, so basically he's doing a demonstration of auditing somebody on Book One auditing on a stage, and everybody's watching. That's like reality TV, right? I mean, you're like literally watching him, this person handle whatever problem is he's handling. Is that right?
And these guys had not seen Book One delivered. Not really. They were all supposedly trained and competent, but none of them really knew much. So they're like upset. They're upset with the mission. They're upset with Flag, and they're demanding to speak with us. So we go into this other room, this big conference room, and John's up front, and all of the people, all of the Book One auditors are there, and they're going, what is that? Where did you learn? We didn't learn that on the seminar for Flag. And John would say, well, that's on page, 46, paragraph 3, because he knew the book by heart.
Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. The L. Ron Hubbard book.
Yeah, they would look in Dianetics, and they would say, oh my God, and he would just refer them page. Yeah, that was there. And these people are just, and so the mission comes that says, what can you do? I said, we get people on the correspondence course and train them. So they say, do it. So we all of a sudden we've got all these people that had done the Flag thing and the advanced Flag seminar, whatever that was, and they're all now going on the correspondence course. And that was like the first one. Then we started doing these events all over the US and Canada. So I'm saying this is in 1981, probably June or something like that. Not too long after they started, maybe July, but we're still in a position where nobody was stopping us, right? Nobody was stopping the missions from contacting us. And then there were orgs that got involved. I was going to, like when I went to we went to Vancouver, we did it with the Vancouver org there. The orgs wanted to do it, so we do the events there. And like I said, we did them all over the U.S. and Canada. We had all these people on the course, and it was actually very exciting. And Flag, they weren't doing anything. They were just kind of sitting back. I didn't hear anything from these guys. So we were getting excited that maybe we've got this thing licked by now. You know, maybe this thing can work.
What about Diana? Did you not hear from her?
Well, I did, but she was, I'll tell you, like once I didn't really hear a whole lot from Diana. I mean, I would inform her what we were doing. In fact, there was a mission holder in Denver by the name of, I mentioned him before, Steve Surrey. And he was actually in San Diego. That's where he was from. And he had the Denver mission, the Salt Lake mission, and 3 missions in Seattle, this guy. So he was like one of our biggest supporters. And we'd go out there and do these events there. We had tons of people going on the course. So he wanted us to come, this one time he wanted us to go up and do this big event up in Seattle for all the missions, and even the org got in on it. And I managed to get a hold of Diana for that one, and she agreed to come to that event and play piano. Right.
Oh, okay.
So I hadn't seen her since I'd been at Flag. And so she came to that event, and after the whole thing, and then they had a big dinner for us, and I was up in front. Diana and I were sitting at the one table, and all the people are just kind of sitting there in awe and all this kind of stuff. And Diana's talking to me about stuff. It was really kind of weird. I couldn't understand a lot of things she was talking about. It was kind of, she was talking about past life, all this kind of just stuff out of the blue. You could tell she was like really kind of overwhelmed with everything and stuff that was going on. She wasn't quite there, you know, it was kind of weird.
Hey, Janice, when Diana left at some point, right? Because she left and married John Ryan and pursued her piano, and she left the Sea Org. Was this around that time period?
Yeah,
it was around that time period that she left. Because it was after Hubbard had left. After Hubbard had gone in 1980, Diana later divorced Horwich, because there was that whole issue on Diana and Mary Sue versus Horwich and LRH as to what happens with Rowan. And that's when LRH wrote the Princess Program, which was a program to get Rowan educated and staying with John Horwich at the Gold Base. And then Janice,
nobody's heard this story. Can you tell? I mean, what is this John Horwich and LRH versus Mary Sue and Diana? This is a new story. I haven't never heard this.
Well, this was Diana and John's divorce.
Sorry, Michael. Sorry to divert, but
yeah. No, go for it. This is not happening, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, Diana ended up marrying John Ryan, who I believe was the manager at one point for the Moody Blues.
No, he was a record producer for the rock group Styx.
Okay.
He produced records for Styx, the music group. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Styx.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so Hubbard insisted that John take Rowan and Rowan be at the Gold Base. And she was the only kid there at 5 years old. Poor thing. She had a nanny or a tutor and grew up at the base as the only child until 1989 when the kids were set up out at Happy Valley. And then she finally had some friends.
Hubbard's granddaughter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So she would go out to Happy Valley and see the friends or they'd come to the base. But she mostly was raised on her own with a tutor, would go to dance classes in Hemet, would go do horse riding lessons. But yeah, so it was John and LRH versus Diana and Mary Sue. And John actually got declared during this time, but because of Rowan, he had to do A to E at the base.
Yeah,
at the boat base. So he was the only suppressive person on the base. Yeah. And then I became the only second suppressive person on the base after John.
Janice, let me ask you though. Diana left the Sea Org. I mean, what precipitated that? Because she left.
She she did leave the Sea Org, and she wanted to do her music. And I don't know how much LRH knew about Diana leaving, but John was helping her, John Ryan was helping her get gigs and so forth, and she had her album, and Roanne every couple of weekends would go down and stay with her and John Ryan. And I wasn't, talking to Diana or John about their personal relationship, but I, as the senior messenger, I used to watch over Roanne. And so, I knew what was going on to a degree, because I'd check on Roanne's tutoring and, how she was being cared for and that type of thing, because John also had a job to do. So I would just check up with the nannies and that type of thing. Yeah. So, anyway, so that's what was going on there. Hubbard and John won, and Mary Sue and Diana didn't, but Roanne did get to go down and see her mother and then come back to the base.
Yeah, and then Diana eventually, years later, came back into the Sea Org when we were there, and she's still there.
Yeah. She divorced John Ryan and came back in, and she went into editing at Gold. And then later on, I heard she was field exec int, and now I hear she's part of the int management PR, and they send her out for IAS events to hobnob with the wealthy whales. And she's still there, and she does not see her daughter.
I have to interject that when she came back to Gold, like when she rejoined the Sea Org and she was working in editing in this junior position, it was very strange for her to call me sir when I walked in. I mean, I had respect for the Hubbard family, you know what I mean? But it was so weird for her to call me sir, because when I joined the Sea Org around the time that I met you, Mike, originally in 1978, Diana was CS6. I mean, she was like this big deal. And I'll never forget that. She was like, yes, sir. No, sir. I'm like, wow. Oh, you don't have to call me sir. Don't call me sir.
Well, Diana,
when at this time.
Yeah. She looked what?
She was still CS6 at this time, like in that event.
Right.
When she was
Yeah, well, when I joined the Sea Org in 68, Diana was like, 14, then 15, and she was over on the Avon River with her dad. And when he moved to the Royal Scotland, she came with him and became CS6. And she was CS6 all those years, except for a short period she was made CS1. So she was over the HCO divisions for a short period, but then she was put back on CS6 and over all the dissemination to new public of Scientology.
Yeah. And this is a photograph from her music album that she did with John Ryan that went out lifetimes. It was a piano. She was a pianist, right? She didn't. Yeah. It was instrumental. There was no singing or anything like that.
Yeah. No, and as a kid at St. Hill, we'd go up and hang out in her room or in Quentin's room, and she had her grand piano in her bedroom, at 14 years old, and magnificent player. And then it was when we went to the ship, she had it in the A-deck lounge, which was Hubbard's lounge and dining room. And she would go in there after work and play the piano, or Ken Urquhart or Amanda Ambrose. Those are pretty much the only people that played that piano.
Okay. Anyway, sorry to divert. I thought it would be an interesting side story, but back to you and your missions in Book One.
So she was still, at that time, even though she came and played the piano, she was still CS6.
Yeah.
And she was still really harassed, because that's what was, I remember sitting there and all these people looking at us, and she's telling me stuff, and I'm going, what's she talking about? And it was really at that event that I realized there's just no way she's even connected with this anymore. She doesn't, she's just out of it, So I knew I really didn't have any support at that point. But we just kept doing the event, doing the thing. And we actually ended up doing an event, because I called the people at the Clearwater Mission, because I had a pretty good connection with them. They're the ones that had originally told me they'd seen the original seminar, and they'd been, had people on the correspondence course. So they're the ones that had told me that Flag done what they did. So when I called them at this time, they said, please come down and do an event here. And then Flag jumped in and they said, we'll do it at Flag. Come down and do it. Will you do it at Flag? And the Clearwater Mission supplied the PCs for John to work with. And we did it. We did the event there. Maybe it was in the FCCI lounge. I don't remember. I think so. Because while John was auditing, all the auditors, all the class 12s came down to watch him, and all the people from Div 6. And after the event, I'll never forget, the people in Div 6, they were really interested because John had these very successful practices over the years, and they didn't have anybody that had really successful auditing practices, and they really wanted to see that being done. So, and he had one not only before in Pueblo when he first started in 1950, but he had them over the years, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but John always liked to have his own practice going. So even when he was working on staff, and even in DC later on, when people were not allowed to have practice, when they're on staff, you're on staff, you can't do that. It was all LRH would say, except for John Galusha, don't bother him on anything he does. So he had a auditing practice in Camden, New Jersey, while he was also on staff running everything for LRH in the tech area. So these guys come down and they're very interested, well, I remember him asking, what were the successful promotional actions that you did to get these? And John was go, I don't know anything about promotion.
You're talking about the mission holders.
No, I'm talking about the Div 6, Flag Div 6.
Okay.
When we were doing an event just like we'd done at all the missions and throughout the U.S. and Canada. We were doing one at Flag, and the Clearwater Mission supplied the people for him to work with, and we did it there. And that's when they came down from the class 12s. The auditors wanted to see him audit, and the Div 6 people came down. And then afterwards, when the people went, they wanted to stay and ask questions. Okay, and that was the big question by the Flag Div 6. How did you get have these successful auditing practices? What were your promotional actions? John goes, I don't know anything about promotion. Well, then how did you get? He says, I found somebody that I could audit, and I delivered the best service I could, whether I charged them for it or not. And pretty soon they brought me people who I could charge, and pretty soon I had more than I could handle. And that was his whole thing. And they were going, what? That's how I did it. I don't know what you're talking about. That was his exact words. Found somebody, whether I charged them for it or not, to deliver the best service. They brought me people I could charge. Soon I had more than I could handle. That's all my practices. He didn't know what else to say. And then the auditors, and this is very interesting, and I'll get into this a little later, but remember the class 12s that were down there watching him audit? They were just blown away by the way he worked with people. And they're asking him stuff like, were those some kind of special TRs that you learned with LRA? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, what are you asking me? Well, but you audit, it's different. He says, I don't know what he was just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. TRs and TRs.
What are you talking about? But he wouldn't even, they weren't even TRs at that time when he started.
TRs for our audience are training routines, which are basically how you communicate. You learn on the communications course. They call them TRs. But anyway.
But they were training drills for auditors originally. Right. That was the whole idea, was to use them so that auditors could learn to acknowledge and all that kind of stuff. So that was their thing. Was there some kind of special TRs that you did with LRH that you learned to do? He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, John had a way of doing things and a way of auditing that people for many years would watch him and they couldn't figure it out. It was like that. It wasn't until much later that we sort of kind of nailed what that was. But at this time, it was like that same old kind of a thing. Whoa, people they'd watch him in awe, but he didn't know what they were talking about. He just says, I'm just doing it. What do you, that kind of. So while we were there, that was a very interesting time that we were down there, because this was at a time when all these little groups started springing up, like Kingsley Wimbush, and people started doing these various things. And there were some of them even promoting it at the base. There was even videos of what's that jerk's Alan Walters doing stuff. And I at that time made a lot of good contacts, And you have that, I met a guy, one of the jewelers that was doing stuff. I sent you a thing of our pin, the Book One pin that he designed. And it was, and all the auditors, anybody graduating the correspondence course would get that pin. It was the old triangle with the Book One. The guy designed it for us. It was really nice. And I also met some people from Europe that got on the correspondence course, and we were training. They were learning how, they were doing the course, but they were also going to get to the point where we would bring them out and train them to be able to set up an office in Europe, right? And they were going to translate it into, I think we were having it translated into German and into French, that sort of thing, by these people. But they had to do the course first, and then they would have to come and train, because the key to that course, it was an incredible course that he put together, but a lot of it was his supervision of that course. When they would find the place, he would, and what their answers, you saw the picture of him grading the tests and grading the lessons, because people would send their lessons in, and then he would go through them and grade them. He wouldn't just refer them to the place, but he would spend time with them based on what were their understanding. And that supervision was just key. And basically, that's it. That's in our office in Denver. And one of the things about that delivery was that, John, it was just really John and I running things. John was part-time and still doing this. John I remember before I mentioned that he had this welding job as a master welder, working in this very dangerous factory with people in their early 20s, and he's like 60, and he's working, and he liked that stuff, but he couldn't, he was still, John and Millie, they had 2 kids, and basically he could not give up that job, and he needed that income, that income to come in. So what we did is, the way we ran things was, I worked full time. And so the income that we had after expenses would cover my nut. And then he covered his nut by doing what he wanted to do. And then anything above my nut, he and I would split. That's kind of how we work things. We handled any other, and it worked very well. But he was during these years that we were going out and doing this stuff, he was working hard labor during the day. He'd come home at night, take a shower, eat, and then drive all the way from Golden to Denver and work doing the lessons and doing all this stuff at night till we'd leave at like 10, right? And then he would be on the weekends, and we'd be flying off, and then he'd be back to work on Monday. And so and even in that part-time, he was able to take care of all the supervision. So we at that point hadn't trained anybody else. And he hadn't trained anybody to do that. And unfortunately, when people ask, about the court, that was the big key, was his supervision, and he didn't train anybody else. Because up until that time, he was able to cover it all until, we were stopped completely, and I was declared, right? Which was later on. But
was he declared with you or no?
No, nobody. That was the weirdest thing. Nobody ever attacked John Galusha. And I'll tell you an interesting story about that too, but it just did not happen. Nobody. In fact, at these events, when you do these events with lots and lots of new people and different people, there are always, at some of these events, I'm not talking about ours, but in other ones in Scientology, there was always some kind of hecklers, there was always something like that. In every event we did like that with John, nobody heckled him, ever. No people. They were in awe. I can't explain it. It was just the way he had an ambiance, something about him. So no, it was all on me. They came after me, but not John.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we were. This was a really interesting time, and in fact, what was kind of fun for me is when the org started getting involved and asking us to come. I was going up, and I would sit down with like the EDs after we'd done the events and stuff, and it was just kind of something I like to do. And I'd mentioned before that Bill Robertson had come up with his, when he trained all the COs for Europe, and then he trained me, and then I started, that sort of thing. And that's how I started the Denver Org, was, running the public. Well, that way of doing things, I would go in there with the EDs of the orgs, and I would hat them. I'd say, you want to learn something? I'll show you. And I would hat them, and their stats would go up. But I say, you can't, don't tell Flag, because you'll be in big trouble. Just get your stats up there. And so they're getting the same thing. Like, you must be doing this flag order number so-and-so. They weren't. They were just doing this. So we were also kind of being able to start getting the orgs kind of under us, that sort of thing. So I had some hope that maybe things would turn around, because whatever was happening up above, whatever happening in the management and all that, there was still stuff. It hadn't all come together yet, right? They weren't stopping that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff wasn't occurring yet. This was still like early part, 1981, early part of 82. But no, that was not occurring at that time. And so
what happened next? What happened next then?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. At that point, and was all I could determine was that. LRH during that, at first, he seemed a little more on the lines, because he started coming up with these videos for Div 6. This great program. There was a great program where he'd filmed these videos where it was, this is the thing that's going to boom your orgs. I don't remember. And he had done all these films that you're supposed to show to new people and the whole thing. And it was really completely opposite from what we're promoting. We're saying don't inform people, audit them, put them in session. Don't just, it was like trying to talk a person out of their unwanted conditions, as John used to say, was like going to a movie and sitting through the film and then sitting through it a second time and trying to talk it into coming out different. Good luck. It's just automatic. This stuff just runs. So this is not the way. None of those programs have worked for us. And we had films in the old days. I think it was Tony Hitchman had an interview.
Yeah, that's right.
Remember that film we showed?
Yeah.
We did all that stuff. None of it. This was so when all those things started coming out, they'd invite me down to these events at the big hotel, and I'd get thrown out because I was laughing. It was everything we're telling people not to do. It's a joke. And I was very verbal about it. I said, this isn't going to work, but it's all right. I said, it's crap. It's not going to work. So they didn't like that either, And so as things continued, it seemed to me like LRH was further off, and Miscavige and Pat Broker were more. They were more running things at this time.
Well, and he was in hiding. He left in
that's right. It was just, and one thing about that, anywhere where LRH is, those people with him have the power. Right. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if they're with him at that place, they got the power. I don't know if you remember, but back on the ship, when he went on his sabbatical to New York, he took two people with him. One was his medical officer, Jim Dulcini. Dulcini was
Jim Dinkowski. Jim Dinkowski.
Right. Yeah. Him. And then there was this guy from External Comm who just followed them. He just ran
Paul
with them.
Preston.
Yeah, and he just went. So LRH says, okay, come on with us. And when they came back to the ship, both those guys had power for just a little while. But they did, just because they'd been with him. So these people that were with him when he was off, doing his being sick or whatever he was doing, those were the people that then had the power coming back in. And for me, I could see, based on actions that were occurring, I knew certain things were Pat Broker. I just knew it, because there were big things that I was working with him, and he was working for me at the time on ship, and he would come up with these ideas to be used within the church now. And I knew it wasn't LRH. It had to be him. And Miscavige too, like the whole. So at this time, they were still kind of taking over stuff. Still, it wasn't all, that's Pat at our wedding.
Pat in the middle in the blue shirt.
Right. It was a very interesting time. Well, this was before. This was all the things that we were able to do was before they actually took over the GO. The GO was still in power. They were still around.
Right.
And from what I remember, from what I could see at the time, and from what I heard from people like Kima, LRH was pretty out of it during these times. You know, he got to a point where he was not doing real well, and these guys were kind of running stuff, and they had eliminated. They needed to get rid of the GO. They definitely, that's the way they had to take over. And in order to get all the money, they had to get rid of the GO. Then they would have the big bucks. They had Sea Org reserves, but the other money was in the mission, in the building fund accounts, in their reserves, and in the GO reserves. And they had to take out the GO. And one of the things that had happened was there was I think it was up in the Northwest somewhere, there was a mission that was taken to court or had some kind of big legal trouble. And it was after that it came out that all the missions need to go under this legal umbrella of SMI, Scientology Missions International. Now, yeah, but this still was before the GO was taken out, right? First, they had to get rid of the GO. And this was after that whole thing in the offices in DC or whatever happened. All the people in the GO were handed over, including Mary Sue, Jane Kember, Herbie Parkhouse, Henning Hilton. All of these guys went to court because
went to prison.
Yeah, well, they all went to prison because it was. Miscavige, those guys just said, look, it had nothing to do with us. They were a renegade group, this Guardian, and that's how they got rid of the Guardian's office.
The funny thing is they got rid of the Guardian's office and just reformed it into the Office of Special Affairs, doing similar stuff.
It's the same. It was under.
But PR-wise, they had to get rid of that image of, the Guardian's office.
They had to get rid of the autonomous network.
Yeah.
That they got once they took over, they had all the autonomous networks that Hubbard had set up, which we talked about before, the LRHCOM, the CMO, the flag rep. These were all under these guys. So they didn't have any problem. The only one they had to get rid of that was the GO. Once they got rid of the Guardian's office, now they're in power. They have the Office of Special Affairs, then that's theirs, right? So all these guys, once they got rid of those guys, everything changed, right? And one of the things that they were able to do was they formed this SMI. They got all the missions that were scared. If the SPs come after you like they did these guys, you're going to be wiped out. So the only hope you have is to be under the legal umbrella of SMI, right? And that was the mission's downfall once they signed those papers, because and this was Miscavige, because it's obvious. It wasn't Miscavige. Well,
LRH.
Well, if it was, then LRH really changed something that his original SMI tape to Miscavige had to do. I heard it, and it had to do with its purpose was not anything to do with legal. It was just to get the big money guys. That was it.
Right. Yeah, and what happened is with the GO being raided by the FBI, and then all the top people of the GO being indicted, that's where Hubbard actually instructed the Commodore's Messenger Org to go and take out the GO, because they'd been running autonomous for so long, and they were doing destructive stuff behind the scene, and they were so criminal in what they were doing, it really backfired. And whether Hubbard knew that they were doing this criminal stuff or not, he's not the one that did it or originated it in the first place. That was Henning Helt and Duke Snyder, who were running the U.S. Guardian's office, and they're the ones who got all these GAS members, Guardian Assistant Staff or something like that. That's what they called them. They got all these GAS members and people with the Men's Project to infiltrate the government, and that's what happened there. And then with SMI, that's where LRH, he makes his money off of book sales. So those Scientology Missions International, the main thing was to sell the wealthy people books.
Right. Right.
And that gave Hubbard royalties from all
Right.
those books, every package that was sold. And it was to hit up the wealthy who would then buy this whole package, and they would find an executive director to run their mission for them, because they were just the money bags.
Right.
And that
Right.
again was Hubbard who came up with that. Just like he
That's
came
the tape
up
I
with
heard.
Wise. Yeah,
Right.
and that's where he came up with that for Wise.
That was the audio tape I heard, and he was talking to Miscavige. That's who he was telling this all to. But after that, SMI was used as to get all the missions, because originally from that tape, when he did that, it didn't, and he even said it on the tape, this does not apply to the regular missions. They don't have to go do this if they want to open a new mission. This is only to get the rich, these big money guys in, so we get that money and those packages, and then marry them up with a guy that can run the mission. But that didn't apply to other missions. He said it. So later on, whether it was him or Miscavige, I thought it was, I don't know. But later on, what it was used for was to get all the missions, all of them under SMI, with the pretext or pretense that it was to save them from the SPs. And that's when they signed up. And once they signed and they went under that umbrella, at that point, they had them. They had their, and the way they started doing, okay, the way they did.
Those mission office worldwide ran all those old missions.
Right.
And that is the money that supported the Guardian's office.
The GO approved that. Yeah, they're the ones that covered, they're the ones that protected the mission. Once the GO was out of the way, the missions were fair game, except that they were all franchises, and they couldn't just go in and take them over. They had to covertly take them over, and that was through the SMI program, by getting them to sign up as a legal umbrella to protect them from the SPs. And once they did that, once they were scared into doing that, they had them. And that's when, and the way they got their money, the way they started, they didn't go in there and just take the money. What they did was that's where they formed a new FBO dictator by the name of Wendell Reynolds, was the FBO dictator with all the finance police. That's why I think that was Pat. I think that was a lot of Pat's idea, because maybe it wasn't, but he was there when I was the dictator, and he was the one I put on the reserve sheet. So whatever it was, that's when they started. And what they would go is they'd send them into the missions to find all these outnesses and bill them at these incredible amounts. And that's how they drain their building fund account.
Right. Now what I think you're totally right on Pat Broker being involved in that.
Oh.
Because he was with Hubbard, and when the mission holders mutinied and went to Bill Franks for support, then Bill Franks ends up getting removed, and and the mission holder conference is done, and DM Miscavige goes in and does that based off reports that he had sent up to Hubbard. So Hubbard is reacting off of the information sent to him by Miscavige, who has a whole conversation with Pat Broker, and they send up the report to Hubbard on what happened. So then Hubbard comes down and is hitting hard on the old-time mission holders, and even Mary Sue at the time says, who's reporting what to Hubbard, because he would never do this to the mission holders. Right. He would know they would go out ethics, and you just pull them in and clean them up and send them back out. But they brought in the public to Scientology, and Hubbard knew the value of these mission holders. But now here he is instructing DM to take these guys down. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to add, I had a leaf blower going outside, so I couldn't say anything. But yeah, that SMI agreement actually also had in it the RTC trademarks, stipulation, which is how they hook these mission holders when they signed it. Say, you're violating the trademarks, we're going to shut you down. And that was the hammer that they used, was that you can't use them, because they put that in that agreement. Now, the original mission holders in the franchise, they didn't have those agreements and all that. But like you said, when they got them to sign it, then they could go in and they could hammer them. and that was the loophole, was to get RTC involved with it as well. I just wanted to mention that.
And yeah, and you're totally right on the Wendell Reynolds, following LRH instructions, set up the finance police and sent them in with unlimited power. Because the Mission Network stats were just on a nosedive. And they had removed the watchdog committee member over SMI because the stats every week just kept going down, and the finance police kept going in and destroying mission after mission after mission. And then I was sent in for an OBS mission. I was sent in to observe, go to a few missions. I went to San Francisco, I went to Davis, I went to Portland, and I saw the destruction that the finance police were leaving behind them. And I came back and did my report, and then I was made Watchdog Committee SMI. And I went into Wendell Reynolds and the first thing I did was to order every finance police out of the missions. And you know what? From then on, it went into years of just affluence, because we just put back in standard management and got rid of that suppression and the suppressive acts those finance police were doing to destroy the field.
Well, it didn't take much time, because right before all this, there was a first mission holder conference that I think you tapped on.
Yeah.
This was at Flag, and I happened to be down there with John.
Right.
I think for some reason we were down there, and Peter.
Is this the one with David Mayo and the knife got pulled out?
I
no.
This is down at the base, Flag, and this is before the SMI. This is before they took over the missions. This is before that. It was like right toward the end, before the GO went to that, and Peter Pinshaw led a lot of mission holders down. They said, we're going to have a meeting down at Flag to really confront management about all this crap they're doing. This is before the finance. So they came down there. I was there, and they demanded to see people like the different
Bill Franks as the executive director.
That's right, and they were down there demanding stuff and doing that, and there was another time where I was there again. All right, I'm just remembering I was there one more time, because Bill Franks was still in charge, and he wanted me to come down because they were doing this whole big Book One thing, and he wanted me involved. Because we had that big thing going in Denver where we did it in the movie theaters and stuff. And at the same time, there were a couple that were running Pubs US. A guy, what was their name? I can't remember. They were at the height of that. So they asked us to come down, me to come down, and them. These two people that had run pubs at that time, and we go down there, and there's this whole meeting of all these guys. And I thought, this is maybe they're turning around. Maybe they're really going to do something, right? And in the meeting, all of the interest, their only interest, Frank's and all of theirs, was in getting Book One on the bestseller list. Like, who cared? It was like how to manipulate this. And it had nothing to do with selling the book. It had nothing to do with training people. It had to do with this, just some stupid thing. And then I went up to Bill's office, and he was doing this based on upper management, Miscavige and these guys. And the whole idea of getting me there was for one purpose: to get the correspondence course. That was the whole idea, because they wanted me to give it to them. And they had, it's not that they didn't have copies, because there were people, Flag had people put on that course so that they could get the course and see how John was. There were people that never did lessons that just got it. And I knew that it was just a setup, that kind of a thing. But they couldn't deliver it without John. They didn't know how to supervise it. They didn't do that. So they wanted me to get John to train these people. In other words, they knew they couldn't have the success with the course just in itself. They needed to have that supervision, and he had to train them. And give them the course. And I remember in Bill Frank's office at the time, talking to him then. And it was disappointing, because Bill and I used to be, was it Bill or was it Kerry Gleason? I'm trying to remember. Who Was
Well,
it Bill?
Probably was
Kerry
Bill. It probably was Bill.
Kerry
Was it Bill?
replaced Bill.
That's who it was. It was Kerry.
Okay.
That's who it was. It wasn't Bill. It was Kerry, because I was very good friends with Kerry, especially on the ship when he was doing Pioneer Area Control, and I was trying to get Book
Yeah.
One going at that time. So when he's telling me this crap, he says, "Well, the people, you know, she was talking as if these guys up lines are some wonderful characters, and I mean, and basically, you need to do this." And I go, "I'm not doing it. I'm not giving you that. You know, screw you and screw them." That was basically my answer. And then after that is when they were able to get the whole thing with the SMI, get all the missions to sign under it, send out the finance police, and then get rid, and then it was, then they had the mission holders conference
In San Francisco.
Yeah, that was the big one. And that was the one where
Yeah.
anybody that argued was declared on the spot. That's where all the guys I worked with, like Steve Surrey, were all declared. And they took over and they just took their missions because they could.
And that was, and that was based on LRH responses to DM's reports on what was going on.
I can't even, that's hard for me to imagine that. I mean, he must have been so out of it to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that was the whole theater to Scientology. It was insane. You know, I'm just saying. If that was, he must have been really out of it.
Well, and that was the craziness too, like, because Kerry Gleason and Alan Buchanan, and they were in Clearwater running Scientology Management, and they couldn't understand what was going on because they thought LRH is being fed false information. That's what they felt, right? They eventually turned out, they actually were, you know, Miscavige and Pat found out about this, but I think Kerry and Alan, they were actually going to look into hiring their own private investigators to locate where Hubbard was so they could go around DM and Pat Broker and actually go see Hubbard themselves. And that was it. That was the end of them. They were gone as soon as that was found out about. So because they were so upset about, they go, he has to be getting false information, and he was. Anyway.
And that's what I kept saying, and I kept getting busted and trapping gophers on the golf course because I would be mouthing off with disaffection.
Yeah. And just for our viewers out there, these mission holders that got declared suppressive people, these people were can-do people like Mike Goldstein. I mean, they had not just one mission, not just two. Some of them had 5, 6 missions.
Steve had 5, yeah.
They had huge, and they were making money. That's the way Hubbard set it up. They paid their tithes to the church, but they would pay their staff, and they would make money, and they built little fiefdoms, getting people into Scientology and sending them up to the orgs. And then this all got squashed. That's what happened, you know.
And everything started falling apart at that point.
Yeah.
So here at this point, you know, we're just kind of, I'm really just kind of backing off. I don't know what we're going to do. And then we were going to do this big event. I thought, you know, at least we're going to do something big. That one that you showed at the Regency Hotel with all those people, had 50 people and 100 new people brought in. That was all. This was one of the last one we did. It was like 1982, and we had this thing planned, and we'd had this thing planned for a while, and this is when people are, you know, the missions are just freaking out, the local missions, because, you know, they're all getting their money drained out of their accounts and all this kind of stuff. And this was a time when you wanted to mention something about Captain Bill. Well, this is Bill got taken off post at this time. He got tossed out, right? This is in 1982. And Bill didn't have any family. He didn't have anybody. And he didn't have anything. That was his whole thing, was the Sea Org. And so the only people he really knew were me and John. Because I don't know if I mentioned this, John got Bill into Scientology.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
John, you know, when that's how he was a biker. He came out. He was John's first mission in Denver, and Bill came and got into his mission there. And then when LRH wrote to John saying, or asked John, "Would you come? I'm going to do this briefing course at St. Hill. Will you help me supervise it?" So John went from Denver to St. Hill to supervise the briefing course with LRH. And Bill at the time says, "Can I go?" You know, and he goes, "Sure, come on." And that's how then Bill went with John that's how he did the first briefing course there. And then, of course, I didn't meet Bill until I went to Europe. And so anyway, he came to Denver, and this was the first time I ever saw Bill Robertson out of uniform. I swear, the guy must have slept in that damn thing. He always had it on.
It's just so people know, when we say Bill Robertson, that's the same as Captain Bill.
Captain Bill Robertson. That's right. Well, see because what happened, he went over there with John, and he did the briefing course with John and LRH. And then when John went back, he stuck around and was in the first Sea Project. That's how he got
before the Sea Project, because he was a trained architect. He actually worked on the St. Hill Castle. And worked on the planning and the building of that. Yes, because I ran a bunch of messages to him later on when I found out, Captain Bill was an architect. He helped build the castle.
He was a talented guy. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. So he arrives in Denver here in street clothes on his bike, which was the same way I guess he had first come over, and met John. So he at that time he didn't have anything. That's all he had was his bag, that satchel on the back of his bike, and just arrived here with nothing.
And Daphne Dan.
This is before Daphne. He came back with Daphne. I'm pretty sure he did, because when he first
remember him in L.A. when he was still in the Sea Org. He hooked up with Daphne Dan.
Well, maybe she did come. I don't think so. The first Daphne Dan came later. He came back with her. Because I remember her with her. She had a book that she gave to my kids that she wrote, some phantasm or something. But the first time he came, he just came here right after he got busted, and he was by himself, and he stayed in my basement. And I had my basement was not built out; it was just open. So we kind of put up stuff down there for him and stuff. So he stayed there in my basement, and what he was saying to us is he basically said, after he was here a little bit, he said, I'm working with LRH directly. This is what he told John and I. And he says, and basically the idea is that we're going to start a new church, a new church out of Church of Scientology, a new one. And it's because it's just too there's no use to try to repair it. It's all messed up. We're just going to start a whole new one, right? And so I'm in touch, and of course we're going. I've been trying to reach LRH for a couple of years to tell him what. And I says, "You're in touch with him? Can you?" He says, "Yes, I'm in telex-com with him." Right? So if you have a telex, I can send it to him. Like, really? Oh my God, So we sent him he'd go out, and and he'd come back with an answer from LRH for us. And as you know, if you were on the ship, a lot of people wrote stuff for LRH, and they could sound like LRH because they wrote either bulletins for him and they wrote it up, or telexes, that kind of a thing. So Bill knew how to do that. But anyway, we just figured, he wouldn't. He's telling me the truth, right? So we'd get these telexes. I was in correspondence with LRH. Oh my God, and this is what the church is doing. Yes, but we're going to start this new church, and oh wow, and I'm very excited. So we have this big event planned in Denver. That's the one at the Regency that you showed the pictures of. So Bill comes to me with a telex from LRH to read this message at the event. And I'm going, I can't do that. Are you kidding? What are you talking about? Well, it's from LRH. And I go, I ain't doing it. It's stupid. And so I'm going to write an orders query up. I told him right away when he gave me the order, I'm not doing it. I'm going to go read this now with the church, and I'm going to read this whole thing from LRH at this big event. What do you think they're going to do? No. And so I said, I'll write an orders query up, which for people who don't know, if you get an order that is going to cause harm or damage or bring the stats down, you don't do it. You're not, it was LRH policy. You don't do that order if it's going to harm things. But what you have to do is write an order query up, and write up like situation data. So, you have to write up this whole thing saying why you won't do it, why you can't do the order, and send that to the guy. So I wrote this orders query of, and then handed it to Bill, and I think it surprised him because he goes back down in the basement And then he comes up with an answer, and I go, whoa. What? I don't have a telex machine in my basement. What's going on? You know? So then he admits, he says, well, I didn't tell you the truth. I am not really in telex communication. So you're not in communication with, oh yes, I am, but he's in a mothership in orbit. I go, what? He's in a mothership in orbit, and he's beaming me this stuff. Okay, okay, cool. Yeah. But at this point, he's so excited about it. He believes, and I don't know. What do I know? I can't just say that. But John and I are going, all right, because he was always a little bit crazy when it came to all the Sea Org stuff and all the OT3 and the Galactic Patrol. He was just really into that stuff. It's like he lived in that. That's why he wore his uniform all the time. And so what? Big deal. But at this point, he's saying, well, I'm what I need to do is I'm going to go dig up all the treasure from Mission into Time. And when I get that treasure, that's how we're going to start this new Ronzorg thing, this new church for LRH. And when I get the money, I'm going to give it. It's going to be billions of dollars, and you'll have enough to really do the book one, and you and John can run all that. Okay, but I don't have any myself. Okay, so we didn't have a lot, so we gave him enough money to get him to New Orleans or something, to talk with some other Scientologists about getting him money so he could get to Europe. He wanted to go to Spain first, I think it was. So we got him, and then he went. I think Amos was in Connecticut, so we went there, and Amos put on an event for him. So we got enough money together to get him over to Europe. And then he went over there and he hooked up with an old reg from AOSHDK by the name of Maria Maloney.
Who recently passed away.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like I was telling you, I just found out Jan Barthol passed away.
Right.
Anyway, so he went over there and hooked up, and he looked for the treasure because he would call me and keep us informed. He wasn't scared. He really believed he was going to do this and find this treasure. Right. LRH was directing him and all this, and he knew where they were from being on the Mission into Time, but he never found anything. He never got anything. So what he ended up doing was just hooking up with Maria, and he had a very big following in Europe because he put Europe there. He was the guy that did it. So she set up lots of meetings with people so that he could talk to them, and that is another story. What happened with that? Because I'll tell that a little bit later. That's how that hasn't happened yet. But he went over there. Once he couldn't find the Mission into Time, then he decided just to figure out how to do the new church himself. That sort of thing. And then that hadn't happened yet. That happened because we're still at the end of our career in Scientology still, because we done that seminar. We're still doing it, and so we kind of hung out and been able to kind of keep things going up until this point too. So at this point, things have gotten to the point now where they're starting to call people down the flag. People are now anybody that's doing anything that's not in line with management. Now you have to go down to an ethics handling flag. And so there's these reports that I've been handing out confidential materials to the public, where that came. And I have to report to flag, for some ethics handling to go down there and talk to them. And at the time I go, what are you talking? I'm not, you have to, the RTC, you have to go down. All these people are going down there and you have to report for ethics handling at flag. So I had a number for Fran Broker Harris, and when we were, she was running this author services, and I had a number for her because at a time when I was working with Diana in the beginning, I talked to her and she gave me her confidential number, so I figured I'd use. So I called her up at the number, and I told her this whole crazy thing, and at that point she says she knew about it. She says, that's fine, Golds. If you want it, you don't have to do this ethics cycle, but you have to come back in the Sea Org. You have to come back now. If you come back to the Sea Org, we'll let you run the North American Book One. You just come back, we can do that, but you have to come back and be part of the fold again. And if you don't, I can't do anything for you. And that was the last time. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. Then I'm sorry, you have to go down and do the flag thing or just get declared. And that was the last time I talked to Franny. So I then figured, okay, I got to go down to flag now and go do this. But I didn't, it was upsetting to me. It was very upsetting. So I figured, if I'm going to go, I'm bringing John, because he's the only, he can keep me sane, and nobody sees him. He's invisible anyway. So I'll just take him with me. So I took John and we went down to flag for this ethics cycle. And then there's that. That's the next story. What happens at that point.
Okay. These are fascinating stories. And we'll pick it up on our next episode with Mike Goldstein. It's been great. I love all these stories. Captain Bill, Diana Hubbard, the mission holders, all of it. It's just all really interesting historical stuff, and we still got more to go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. We want to thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. Hit that like button, hit the notification button. It helps us get the word out to other people and all that. And we appreciate y'all watching. If you have any questions or comments, we read them all and they're great. We love all the feedback. So please go down and write any questions, make any comments, and we'll read them and respond to them. And if you want to support our channel, in the description, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link. You just click on it, follow those instructions. We appreciate any support that you may send our way. Janice and John, Janice and Mike, sorry. Have you got anything else you guys want to say before we end off this episode?
No.
Well, we want to thank everybody for watching, and until next time, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.